All right, welcome. We are live. It is the audio production town hall installation for August already in 2023. We have a pretty exciting program here today, a little bit bigger production than we normally have for our town hall meetings, but we have the wonderful gentleman from AudioScape Engineering out of, not Daytona anymore, it's Orange, Daytona, Orange something, Orange Beach. Florida here, so we have some local friends as well. In case you haven't heard of AudioScape, it is again a Florida-based company that creates replicas of high-end analog gear. Everything is hand-built. Everything is point-to-point. So I just thought it'd be really interesting for all our audio production and recording art students to hear from our friends today. Let me introduce everybody. We have, as I close the app, we have Chris Yetter, the owner and operator, founder of AudioScape, along with his partner, Nicole Hayes. So not only is AudioScape local, it's also half female-owned company, which is great. To his right, we have my good friend, Trevor Sostarich, marketing, social media, noisemaker. He is a man of many hats. And lastly, over here, Vanna White. No, I mean, on the gear here, we have Ian. It's all good in the hood. He is the product specialist that's going to be showing us and demonstrating some of the different products we have in these wonderful racks today. So without further ado, Chris, everybody, welcome.
Oh, thanks, Ed.
Thanks for coming and joining us here in our little stage here. I guess, I don't know, do you want to just jump right into it and just tell us, what's AudioScape all about and what maybe...
Well, we always say AudioScape it's our take on classic recording equipment. So, and what we mean by our take is it's not just a straight up replica. A lot of times, we are competing with modern digital environments. And it's not like, as much as we'd love it to be 1965, it's not,
Mm-hmm.
So... we have to look at trying to get everything as low noise as possible, but still retain all the good tone, texture that you would get out of the original units.
Do you find that that's a challenge sometimes living in this digital world? I think our students can relate to this. Is one huge difference between the analog gear and getting into digital is sometimes our levels, getting things into the box nice and hot. Do you find it a challenge at all sometimes to get things to be high output, to get to a proper level digitally? Are you more old school and go off VU and average and -18 or?
That's typically not a huge issue. It's just getting the signal to noise ratio in particular. Usually a lot of these old designs, like these old compressors, for instance, they just have tons of gain, and sometimes that can equal tons of noise.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes getting the noise, the gain structure just right, that's definitely a challenge, but it's usually on the opposite end as far as not, it's not having enough gain, it's usually having too much. And then if you find a tasteful way to attenuate that gain just a little bit, so you get, you can drive the output stage as much as you want and get that payoff that you expect, but also have it coming in where the signal to noise ratio is just, acceptable for today's modern standards.
Gotcha, because it's quite a bit of different ball game compared to 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, we have parts that don't exist anymore. We have parts that aren't in use, and I imagine trying to go through and replicate or try to give that same character with your twist can be a challenge sometimes, given the parts that are available. Or
certainly, yeah, and a lot of parts. We advertise this as well, that a lot of the parts we're using are new old stock parts, and I mean, there's a lot of great places. Even in Florida, there's a lot of great places. Like Skycraft is right up the road.
Oh, Skycraft,
yeah,
wonderful place.
Yeah, they have a lot of new old stock components, and there's just people all over the U.S. that we tap into for new old stock tubes. Like I was mentioning, some of the active components we use in the 260 VU to recreate the 160 the VCA, and using those. We get those, and we use the original parts in those, because otherwise it just won't make sound with the modern FET equivalents, things like that. So.
And I think that's important for students to know that all these units here, it's it's a smaller company in the scheme of things. What do you say you're up to? Well, you're growing. You're up to 30.
Yeah, we're up to 30 employees.
30
people.
employees now. They're all hand built. Again, local Florida people building these point to point, hand soldered. There's not any sort of big factory where these are getting spit out or anything. Or,
No.
they're not being shipped over from China or.
No.
I mean,
no,
everything's assembled right here with a lot of quality control.
Yes,
And,
not only employees, 30 audio enthusiasts that
Gotcha.
all sit and we listen, we tinker, we make sure everything is on point before it leaves our shop, and gets to you. So, and if it's not, then it just doesn't. So
it's interesting.
Yep.
So it's a group of audio enthusiasts, which I think that's we were talking about earlier. I find that interesting. You wouldn't say that all your employees they didn't come from like electrical engineering schools or big academic backgrounds. They're more, say, musicians or people that were really interested in audio that kind of sought you out and found you and have a passion for it. And
Yep.
From there, would you say you educate a lot of your employees, or does that happen in-house, or do they come in with some of the knowledge already, or?
Obviously, there's varying degrees of knowledge when someone comes to work, but usually there's, they've either built something, whether it's guitar amps, guitar pedals, they've done some repairs on their own stuff, or they've, been to an audio school and they've, done the program where they've, built the guitar pedal and things like that. And yeah, there's a lot of nuance with every single product, and it's myself included. I'm a student of each piece as we learn its mysteries and what it can throw at you. And sometimes it's a lot easier to develop something new because you have a lot of modern conveniences to choose from. But when you're trying to recreate something that's been extinct for decades and decades, it's
Gotcha.
difficult. Yeah.
So why should a student that's sitting out there that's mostly, with a lot of our students, they're exposed, the online students not quite as much, but our campus students see a lot of different pieces of outboard gear, and we're spoiled in that sense that they see the Pultec styles and the 1176s, and we even have some of the real pieces here in stocked in some of the studios. But for most of these students, the prices are so out of hand on the original stuff. Why should a student maybe explore like this type of gear, some of these emulations or reproductions? What's the benefit for them?
As far as using it hands-on, it's endless. You really, I feel like it's one thing to use it in the box, and that's great, but like there's nothing like using something that's real right there in front of you. And not to mention, there's definitely something different about hardware. I mean, you could debate hardware and software all day long,
like which
but
is better.
yeah, at the end of the day, zeros for give me 500 volts DC running through some tubes, over zeros and ones any day of the week.
Gotcha. Yeah. So people can have their preferences, but the one thing I feel like you can't argue when you run into somebody that is collecting analog gear or starting an analog-based studio is that person is kind of creating their own sort of sonic palette. A lot of times analog pieces of gear, each one can be a little different, even if it's from the same line of production. And I feel like a lot of engineers, they create their own sort of unique palette, their own sounds with their different pieces of hardware that they chain together and use in their own way that you're not going to find in a plug-in or a software emulation, or where all those are going to sound exactly the same. If I use the same UA emulation that you're using, it's going to react the same way.
And that's a really interesting point, actually, because yeah, they are, that plugin is emulating that one thing, and there are nuances. I mean, the tolerance of the components that are used back then, I mean, they vary, even just the way they heat up. They sound different after they've been on for 2 hours than they do after 5 minutes. So you can really carve out your own creative, unique sound with having your own piece of hardware. That is just that one singular piece. That is your, 76F, for instance. There's, I don't want to use the, adage is, snowflake, but, saying,
Well, yeah, no, every piece of gear is definitely a snowflake, because I mean, like everyone's different. So
yeah,
and
I use that
in
term
a
a lot
range
when talking with students. I teach the vocal classes, and I'm always like, every take is a snowflake, right? Every vocal take you do, it's different. There's little nuances. There's little differences in pitch and time and the rhythm and the way they sing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really the same way with when you start looking at analog gear. I mean, this tube might just sound a hair different than the tube that was in this unit, and then when you start adding all those little different specs, you really kind of create something unique. So that could be intimidating, I think, for students in some sense too, that when we talk about replicas, we look at the originals, how expensive they are. When we look at things from Erie and Teletronics and the older RCA and the older companies, and now that we have, I mean, just the 1176 alone, I could probably think of a dozen companies that are making a version of 1176, and each one of those almost sound different from one another.
Oh yeah, they do. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, depending on the transformers used, and I mean, active components. Like our 76s, like use vintage correct carbon composition resistors, for instance, in the audio section, and that's. To me, that makes a huge difference in the output of the final sound. That going through all those old school style, and they have a wide tolerance, those resistors, but they sound so good, especially, and we use them in the tube circuits like the opto as well, and like there is definitely something different about a carbon composition resistor when it's got that high voltage going through it, and
gotcha.
and
so I'm sorry.
No.
So you'd say that you've done the research, you've compared a lot of new and old stock parts, and you feel that you all have made an educated decision to those parts that you've picked out have ultimately ended up.
This is all of this is born out of necessity. This is like personally I wanted this stuff, I could not get it, right? And I was just, oh, this sounds great. This is better than what's available to me honestly at any price point. Is like really, where I was coming from, and the idea was keep it low price for people, sell direct. It's not, let other people it's kind of been an underdog company, and the people that were early adopters of AudioScape were underdogs in a lot of way, and that's we've sort of
I kind of
hung our hat on.
I feel like it started a little bit of a cult following. I mean, I don't know if that's the right word.
No,
No, I mean, well, I always tell people, welcome to the fam, or the family. We try to be like a family when it comes to all of our customers. Like you're being invited into the family when you buy something from us. So they know that they can reach out and they can rely on us no matter what. And I mean, we're always here to talk about everything. Somebody said recently, they were just like, oh, it's great that I finally got to join the cult, and I was just like, okay.
Cult of AudioScape.
Didn't think that we were a cult, but
our fan club or whatever you want to call it. I just think, as myself, I got lucky, entered the studio world in the mid '90s. Yeah. I'm kind of from that last vestige of the analog and tape days. Like I learned how to align tape machines and cut tape, but luckily didn't have to do that for very long. And then got there right at the beginning of the Pro Tools age. And then I found myself, all through the 90s and the 2000s getting sucked into the whole, as we got, more into the box and inside digital and getting away from big consoles. But then after a while, I felt myself like I went all the way back and purchased a tape machine, and then reminded myself why I hated recording the tape, because it's a pain in the butt. But all this type of gear, I started going back and started searching out Craigslist and buying old gear and reselling it. And then when I stumbled across your company, I really felt like, wow, this is kind of something that I've been looking for. And I'm not trying to, full disclosure, I have bought a couple pieces of their gear over the years. And I do feel like for the price point and for the quality that you're getting, and sonically, it's definitely something that's attainable by students. It's not. The prices, I mean, for some students that get right out of school, you might look at it and be like, okay, that's a bit pricey. But when you compare it to, the originals or other companies, I mean, it's incredibly competitive. And I think it's a good point that students can get, a price point that students get started with. So, all right, enough of that tangent there. I think maybe our good friend Ian wants to maybe demonstrate some of this gear. We talked about it long enough, or do you want to actually listen to some stuff?
Yeah, we can start off with this rack right here. It's our classic compressors, and the track I got going through right now, we have it on our G bus, which is our bus comp. This is with the compressor engaged, and that's without, so you can kind of like help bring up that volume a little bit and even out the mix. But there's several different options you can have on it as well. So. Really squish it down if you want. So underneath that we have our EQP, and has a couple different bands on here. Got the low end. You can boost it or attenuate it.
You can get that classic Pultec trick.
Yeah.
Yep.
Boost and cut.
Yep.
Yeah. And you can hear like the high end.
Oh yeah.
It's pretty apparent. That's without. But then right below that we have our opto, which is your standard optical compressor. And right below that is our 76A, which is one of my favorites. You can really get some good overtone harmonics on this. So that's out.
Bass track on there.
Yeah.
Heavy bass track.
Is that you?
Nah.
No, not even.
No. And the trick with the 76s as well, you can do the all-in and like smash it if you want. Really like squish that signal down.
Wow.
Yeah. And then right below that is our D. It's a little bit more forgiving than the A is. It's what is it, like 5 dB quieter?
Yeah, on the
So
input. Yep.
a little less aggressive, you know, so you've got to put a softer track on there. But this is with it out, and then with it in. And the 76F right below that is even a little bit more forgiving than the,
And you can hear how it's brighter as well.
yeah.
You know.
It's a bit quieter than the D is, but. And this is with it out. Then back in. Cool. All right. So that was this rack. That's our classic compressors and our EQP. On this rack over here, we have our stereo reverb, which we could start off with. And this one, all the springs in it are hand cut. There's 12 springs, all hand cut, and temporally tuned together. So you get a nice mix. This is just the wet channel.
That sounds great.
And there's 4-band EQ on it too, so you can kind of mix what you want in and out of it. And then this is with it parallel. And on it, there's also a mono drive button, which when engaged, it sums the input channel to a mono channel, but it still comes out as stereo. Then the mono return actually sums the whole reverb track down to a mono channel. So you get plenty of options on this one too. It's a fun one. And right below that is one of our newer models. This is our AS78 stereo 76 essentially. What's the revision this one's based off of?
It's like a stereo Rev G.
Rev G.
Which is great. Adds variety to the lineup as we do the A, the D, and the F, which you showed in the other rack.
Yeah. Got your standard options on here as well, and we added a side chain filter on it too, 80 and 120 hertz.
Oh, wow.
So you can like just really retain some of that low end, not bog down your mixed or your compression a little too much. So you can just keep some of that oomph in there.
Used on so many classic records for overheads, and we're the first company to bring it back. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've not seen another stereo 1178 out there.
Yeah, this one's a fun one to mess around with for sure. You can clean it up with having a slower release, or open it up again with a faster release on there. And right below that, we have our 260 VU. Here. With this one, it acts as like a dual mono compressor.
Yep.
But we can link the RMS here as well, so it kind of acts a little bit more as like a stereo compressor, but inherently it's more of a dual mono.
It's like getting two original 160s VCAs
Yeah.
and putting them in a rack is like what the 260 is. And like what Ian was saying, that RMS actually links to timing caps. So it's not like a true stereo link, but the timing detector, the human ear part of the circuit gets linked together.
Cool. And is that unique to this unit? That wasn't part of the
Correct.
original. Very cool.
Yeah.
Yes. A little special thing we added in there. And below that we have our Golden 58. It's a tube preamp.
Limited to 300 total as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
Yeah, very limited product. So.
Completely original design, tube preamp.
And this one, yeah, this one's not emulating an older piece of gear. This is your own
Yes.
Correct.
own design.
Yes.
Yeah, it has a typical phase switch on it, so you can, flip it if it happens to be out of phase. Or there's a full and a voice selection on it too, so you can cut out some of that low end in there or keep it full. And Chris might be better off talking about the ASA 6A.
Well, I mean, even back to the Golden, we're listening to it in line mode, and it's actually got separate line inputs, as you know, because you have it, which I think is really handy because you can plug in your mic in the back, you can plug in your line inputs, for your mix, and you can just toggle between them.
It's not going to bother anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Some units will cut it out either or.
Yeah, and the ASA 6A down there on the bottom is a new product we just announced. It's yet to be released, but that is a classic Very compressor from the 1950s, based off the old RCA BA6A. And it uses all the original tube layout, all the rectifier tubes. We're really huge on keeping all the original tube layout. Like a lot of times you'll see tube rectifiers are thrown to the wayside and just use diodes because it's easier. But I'm a guitar player. That was my instrument. I know how important a tube rectifier is in a circuit and that sort of sag, and it's very important to make sure that
Big part of the sound of that unit, right?
Exactly. So, yeah, it uses.
And this is another unit you don't see a replica of out there.
No, it's very, very difficult to do. The iron is extremely important, Same with the EQP up there. This has an interstage transformer, and those are so important for bandwidth if you want to get a full sound. Sometimes you'll hear replicas don't sound like the original, like the vintage unit. A lot of that has to do with iron, tubes, circuitry, but interstage transformers are a big deal when it comes to bandwidth, and they'll make something sound cheap really quick if you don't get that right.
I agree with that because I've been using many replicas over the years. I won't name names of companies, but being lucky enough to use some of the original Yuri and Teletronics, I've tried out quite a few opto compressors out there, and I just feel like there's not much of a sound to it. It's that, it's compressing or reacting in the way I expect an opto to work, but there's just not that little fairy dust on it. There isn't that little tonal change or shift that I would expect from when I run a vocal through an LA2A. Am I getting the big bottom end of the transformer? It's running through. Am I getting that low end bump? And
it's a very transparent circuit. It's a very transparent circuit to begin with, but that character comes from that input transformer in particular.
So just not cutting corners on the parts and just making sure you're staying more true to the original designs in that sense.
And like we were discussing before, everything's hand built here in the U.S., but a lot of the parts, new old stock parts, are sourced in the U.S., and that's really a big deal for the end final result. It's not just like made in the USA. No, it's like these parts were used. These devices were built here back then, and these parts are still available to us being based here, and that's
all these are
really
pretty much
important.
American companies, right? RCA or Yuri, or they were all produced over here. So you're not going to find that stuff in Europe or other countries. But that's great. Now, we kind of flew through a lot of these models pretty quickly. Just for the students at home, they see plugins called a spring reverb. What the heck is a spring reverb exactly? And why does yours have 12 springs in it?
That's an excellent question. I mentioned being a guitar player earlier. A lot of the springs you have in your guitar amps, for instance, have like 2 or 3 loose floppy springs, and they just sort of. Spring reverbs have kind of caught a bad rap because of that. There's some cool stuff you could do with that. Sometimes you've seen some companies find some creative uses where you can actually hit the spring up on top.
Get that rattle.
And that's cool. But this is actually more, our spring reverb is actually more of like an echo chamber. of sorts, and it's an equally tempered chamber. So the left and the right side are actually completely different. It's like being in like two different spots in the same room, or even just two different rooms altogether. So we encourage people to not maybe, set the mix levels the same. It might be, yeah.
You might have to tweak them a little bit. They're not going to be perfectly placed like a digital reverb or a plug-in. There's a little bit of variance to it.
Yeah, it's a lovely, beautiful chamber effect that it creates. It's like blowing in the damper of the piano or whatever, like that equally tempered sound. So it's definitely a unique piece, and nobody, when, like I was mentioning, Wayne Kirkwood was the original designer. We worked with him in the early 80s, late 70s range. He was working on the XL305 for Mic Mix, was the company. Okay. And you can still find the originals.
Oh, okay, yeah. I've seen the old ones.
Yeah, and this is actually a reimagining of that. So whereas we try to get everything as close as possible with, say, like the 2A, the Opto, and things like that, with this we actually reimagined it. It's like completely different as far as its decay times from the original and things like that. It still kept the same core concept, but it's really like the end goal was to make this rival like an EMT 140 in a sense.
Very high end.
You're still used for that. It's not going to replace that, but this is like the greatest general purpose spring reverb you can find out there.
We have a big plate sitting up in a graveyard above the studio, tilted on its side. I've asked the techs to look at it and see if we could resurrect it.
What is it, like an EMT?
It's an old EMT.
Yeah,
it's
we
huge.
had it.
I'll have to show you guys. But I mean, there is, again, working in the older studios, I was lucky enough to be at a facility that had 3 different plates, and having those different palettes is quite amazing. I mean, again, plugins, digital verbs, never going to replicate that uniqueness of each individual plate, or even like you say, 12 springs in one reverb box. Now, each different spring doesn't just vibrate on its own. Do they all react off one another, and you get harmonics created from those 12 strings?
I mentioned earlier a little bit of the construction without getting too crazy, but in that one guitar sled, with the 3 floppy springs, well, we have 4 sleds inside of there with 3 springs each, and they're all cut. So they're cut to, like the little turns on the spring you see, they're all cut to a certain number, and they're stretched out.
String length, just like a guitar string.
Yeah, and some of them are really super tight, some of them are a little looser, so they all have their own timing. So each 12 of those springs has their own timing, and it creates, like I said, it creates this lovely chamber effect. So the left and the right are completely different. And yeah, the right's actually a little longer on the decay if you listen, with headphones or anything like that. Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
How dare you?
Yeah.
That is quite a lovely piece. Now, our students, at least the audio production students, they all receive they have the Slate digital plug-in package. Mm-hmm. And that alone, their package is kind of cool because they do have 3 different 1176's revisions in it, which kind of correspond pretty much to these 3 different, because I think they have a modern version, which I think would be kind of similar to that one that you have on the bottom. Mm-hmm. They do an N, they do the A as well. So for those of you students at home, you can play with a few of these 1176 style compressors on your own. My classes, I've been encouraging you all to start digging in there and especially start playing with those attack and release times. I'll tell you right now, one of my biggest pet peeves as an instructor is when I open up mixes or sessions from students and I go through the time explaining 1176s and I find the attack and release in the default setting. I'm just like, Now, tell me this. When you first boot up an 1176, is there kind of a default position that you place the attack and release when you first go to use it, or?
Well, we usually check everything in its fastest position to start, and then, of course, we make sure that the throw of each control is working properly.
Gotcha.
And, obviously, and the, one thing you talked about, I'm sure you've taught is the Dr. Pepper setting as well, with the 1176, and that's also one area we check. We check all buttons in, we have like a checklist on every single product, so we have to make sure every single functioning control is working properly. So yeah, we run it through its paces.
I just find that some of my students, they get a little lost with the 1176 sometimes because they equate the input drive to a threshold. They start bringing up the input gain. they see that compression start hitting harder, and I think it's a misnomer. They think that's threshold. They don't realize how much gain they're adding. Typically, they're going to have to bring gain back down to gain stage or bring you back to a normal level. But the one thing I always encourage, again, for them to mess with that attack and release, especially that attack on 1176, the fastest setting you're going to get so much more compression out of as opposed to if you put it on the slowest setting off the bat. So a lot of times I encourage them to go to the slowest attack, fastest release, start there, 4 to 1. So you're doing as little as possible. See what the lightest setting on this is. Then as you start to get a little used to it, now we can crank that input, maybe crank those higher ratios and do some crazier stuff with it. But so we have the 1176s, Opto. What's different about your Opto, say, to maybe some other replicas out there, or maybe a
we make
plug-in?
all our the T4B modules. We make all on site. We've always have. When I started, I was talking about this earlier a little bit. You know, the first one we built was I built it point to point with original transformers, just all like original parts. And I used to repair old T4B, T4A modules, and I would see that like they were quite different from the newer JBL style T4Bs you could get like as replacements for your current models. And I would see that they, in particular, they had a resistor across the EL panel versus a cap coming off one of the legs or whatever. And to me, I always just liked the way those older ones performed, even with the aged components and things like that. So we have a replica of the T4B that's more vintage accurate, in my opinion, than what you can get out there. So just even the module that's in there, the T4B, and we used to sell them separate, but then we stopped doing it because people thought they could get like the AudioScape sound and like their cheaper units, and that's not even like carbon. It's the sum of all the parts, like the carbon composition resistors, the caps that have that right snap, down to even the electrolytics, all the new old stock tubes, the transformers.
So just all those little decisions you're making to go with those sonic decisions.
It's like a great song, right? It's the sum of all the parts.
All the parts.
Yeah, that's exactly
That's why
what it is.
a lot of times building mixes or talking about mixing with students, mixing, very difficult thing to teach, I feel, sometimes. But that's one thing I try to tell them is all those little decisions you make. If I decide I'm putting this plug in here, is it making this 2% better, 5% better? If that's the answer, okay, go. We'll go ahead and put that on. And the culmination of all those little decisions to make things 1% better, just a little bit better, even though it might be the slightest little difference you're hearing, just if you're making those decisions, the right decisions, that's going to culminate to better sounding mix, better sounding song, all
and
those little parts.
And it's the piece as a whole, right? You don't. You, I'm sure you always preach, don't solo something and like let's hear it in the context of the mix, and that's all these decisions are made in the context of the unit as a whole.
That's great.
Yep.
That's great. So one thing we were talking about before we started recording, I was happy to see, and that's a feature you have in a couple of these units, is that you have a high-pass filter, especially with these compressors, you have a high-pass filter detection circuit. Maybe if students don't understand what that is, maybe you want to explain that?
The lower frequencies basically are not affected by the compressor. Now, I mean, we were talking about the HF control that's on the Opto, for instance, the 2A style circuit that we sell. And that's a little bit different, actually, because that's actually one of the most questions we get the most is like, how does that work? Because it's not just like a sidechain high pass where like, as you sweep it, like higher frequencies only get compressed. What happens is it's a detector, basically. It's a limit sensitivity, so it's going to become more sensitive to higher frequencies as you start sweeping that control counterclockwise.
Oh, so it doesn't ignore the...
It doesn't ignore. It still compresses the full frequency range, but it becomes more sensitive to those frequencies.
To the higher frequencies.
Yeah,
Okay, so
as you start sweeping it left, all the way up to about 16K, I believe, when you're all the way counterclockwise.
Wow, so at that point, you're really just kind of getting into de-essing, possibly?
Yeah.
Or just shaving the top end off. And yeah, that's a great feature, because I was telling you earlier, most engineers, I don't even think were aware that there was a screw on the back that you could adjust on the originals, and now having that up front, I mean, for me, it's just been like, this is amazing, because depending when I'm running in through it, I adjust that high pass, especially with vocals, I back that off quite a bit so plosives don't freak out, or you just don't lose some of that body, especially if you're tracking bass or a kick drum or something like that.
It's extremely important. And and a lot of times it was depending on where that unit was going back then, whether it was going to a broadcast or radio station, they may have set it different from the factory, in the back for those applications. But having that control over the compression on the front panel is
Yeah,
it's so nice. It's a treat, you
It's
know.
a really nice feature that I've never been used to having, and now it's just been it really just opens up a lot more possibilities with it, especially just, I mean, in the essence that you're not going to over-compress. Another thing I try to get across to the students, the first thing that we lose when we start doing lots of gain reduction is you're going to lose that low end. You know, you're not going to get that back, or you're going to have to adjust for it afterwards with an EQ, like maybe your Pultec or something is a classic trick. But definitely having the HPF before the circuit, being able to shave some of that off so it doesn't freak out. Another reason why, I mean, I know you don't make a model like this, Distressor. They have
We love Empirical Labs. Yeah,
Empirical Labs, great company. They were one of the first. I mean, back in the '90s when that Distressor first came out, having that ability to put that high pass on was just such a game changer for vocals, especially. You know.
Oh yeah.
And I remember, I know you've been asked before why you all don't make a Distressor, but
we don't. Empirical Labs is just like really good friends of ours,
and they're
also, if you look at most of the racks that we'll post online or anything like that, like because we like to share racks that people post with our gear in it, like the Distressor is always there.
It's a more modern product as well.
You don't want to. They're still in production.
They're still in production, and a lot of times, like, you know, even though some of the original companies may be around, a lot of people don't realize a lot of the lineage of those has been broken over time, or they were decades obsolete, and then they were rebooted.
Oh yeah, there hasn't been a BX, the RCA they were produced in how many years? I mean, 40, 50 years.
And it uses those old black metal tubes from like the 30s and 40s. It's
the truest of all metal. But yeah, it just really it gives it a character that you're not going to get. So we have what else can we look at here to talk about? We went through well,
there's some models we don't even have in the racks here because we ran out of space, but you know, we have like the old Gates Stay Level, which is another very Muse style compressor. We have the D-Comp, which is a diode compressor, which is, you know, more British design.
The Zener diode.
Yep, the Zener.
My favorite word in audio.
Yep.
And so, I guess just getting it back just with students and, you know, compression still, I felt like for me when I got out of audio school, I understood what a compressor was and what it did, but I didn't really understand it until you really start getting your hands on it and start playing with it. And I try to express to the students that these are as much tone generators as they are dealing with the dynamics. Now, what would you say, what's the biggest factor from piece to piece if we just talk about the compressors? What creates the biggest tonal difference under the hood here? Is it the actual, would you say a transformer, or the way the attack works on each unit, the detect circuit, or?
Well, once again, excellent question. You know, sometimes you can use them in tandem, like for instance, a 76 style compressor with the 2A. I mean, you know, either or, you know, depending on what you prefer, but you can grab those fast peaks with an 1176, and then you can also smooth it out on the back end with the 2A. So like, just think big, fat, smooth, usually with the tube compressor, and then, you know, a FET compressor, solid state, a lot of times, like with the 76 style, it's very fast. So
that's good for the students, I think, to realize, is that when you get into the 1176 style compressors, they're much more quicker with the transients, correct?
And they're great to track with too, and even just in moderate settings, just to grab those fast peaks so you don't clip out. You know.
And that's a good point between mixing and matching. Most students have trouble enough just with one compressor. If we're going to use two compressors, their heads can blow up sometimes. But
that's a classic sound though, used on like countless hit records.
Yes,
you know.
I growing up over the years, I'd seen many engineers. You go to the 1176 first to grab some of the quick peaks, just kind of tapping it constantly, and then you run it through the opto. And if you're seeing the opto move more than a dB after that, you're probably over compressing because you're just kind of using that for the body and just a final smooth out. And my students that I have this month, they're familiar with it because I'm basically doing the same thing during my lecture. I run it out of the 53 preamp into a distressor. In a distressor, I use a very fast attack and release. I turn on the DS circuit, and I'm just tapping it a couple 2-3 dB, just kind of getting those transients on the vocal, the sibilants. And then it runs into the opto, which I'm really just kind of using more. It just kind of beefs up the vocal. It adds a nice big bottom end to the vocal, I feel, and really just tapping it, just a touch, just kind of really it's just kind of coloring more than anything. I mean,
Yep.
more so than actual. Again, students, I need you to realize that you're affecting the tone or almost the harmonics or EQ shape of the source as much as actually affecting the transients. This
Yeah.
thing's driving me crazy. Sorry.
No, you're good. Yeah, and you're right. Even if you run the opto with the peak reduction down, no compression, you are getting that. It's a tone box. Just
is.
it's going through all those tubes and transformers. Same with the EQP circuit there. The EQ. You're still running through the transformers in the line amp. If you just hit bypass, you're not in no.
It's not a true bypass. It's not taking it out.
No.
It leaves it in the circuit still.
Yep,
Okay,
it
that's
leaves
great.
the line amp in the circuit.
That's great. So, I think students need to realize. I mean, we have. It's such an in-the-box world. We do so much, inside the computer. But I think this is not going to go away. There's always going to be a need for good front end, for good tracking gear. I mean, sure, there can be emulations, or maybe, you look at like a Kemper. Was it Kempler? Is that the new guitar?
The Kemper.
Yeah, Kemper amps.
Kemper
Yeah,
amps. They're doing kind of the amp modeling, and I mean, I think even if we do start to see a little bit of that with,
Those things are pretty cool.
They are very cool.
Because you can literally go up to an amp and just clone it.
You clone this
On it. But I mean, it's not going to sound the same as the actual amp, but I mean, it will clone it.
And then going back and forth, you're cloning one thing. If you're trying to, once a lot of the people that I notice that buy this gear, they're looking for their sound, and their sound is that one unique piece, maybe out of a line of things. So that's something that to be said for as well. Besides just having the same sound of a particular style compressor.
Yep.
Strapped on a plug-in.
Get your own unique thing. So
Yep.
I guess we just have a couple minutes left. Is there anything else that you all wanted to demonstrate on the racks, or anything we wanted to cover? Or maybe listen to something real quick before we wrap up?
I did mention some of the other products that aren't in the racks. We also do the MEQ style
That's right. The
equalizer,
mid-range,
the mid-range,
say.
which is awesome on guitars or any we also have some 500 series products we didn't bring as well. So there is some affordable things we do sell, and it's probably the best bang for your buck product we do offer is that the first one that Ian demonstrated there, which is the SSL style bus compressor.
So I mean, most of my students I think have played with the Waves SSL compressor, and probably other emulations as well. I got to be honest, I haven't been blown away by a lot of the plug-in versions. Maybe the new, I have not used the full SSL one that they have, which I heard is really good.
I haven't either, but the biggest difference I notice is actually the stereo image.
The actual image.
For some reason, a lot of the plug-in versions, and that's I find stereo imaging is so important, and people have, when we first started, because that was our first product, the bus comp, and people would send me clips, and I would hear the difference in the stereo field just through my phone speaker.
Would you say?
I'm talking 2017, 2016 phone speaker, and I would hear the difference.
Would you say that's kind of the similar phenomena of when we hear stuff being streamed, or when we hear stuff compressed to MP3? They always talk about, ooh, I'm losing my center, compared to when I break out my old CD that's 1644, and you still, the stereo field of it. I feel like that a lot of times with plugins or with
it's almost a smearing kind of effect that and there's that's, you're going to get finished, polished mixes, and your stereo field's going to be improved. And we sell that. We started, I think we started selling them back then for $6.99. I think our regular price is $7.99 on that. And if you start adding up subscription prices on plugins and things like that over time, and if this is something you're serious about music, and you see yourself making music for 10, 15 years, that's a worthy investment.
Yeah, I mean, and another great thing I found out over the years is a lot of times this analog gear definitely retains its value, or it goes up nicely in value. your plugins aren't going to do that so much. Or,
Well, also you don't need a license for these, you know.
True.
So like,
True.
license keeper.
Yeah, you
means
know,
that
you have to plug in your
like you said,
iLock
re-up
into
every
the
year
side
and
of the
everything.
rack.
Yeah.
But it is a different experience.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it's harder to get things set up and going, you know, and sometimes you walk in an analog studio, you turn everything on, there's one thing that's not works and it could derail your whole session, and we've all been there. You know, I deal with it.
Recall,
Recall as well, and you know, it is definitely a different experience, but I feel like you really truly know a unit when you actually get hands-on and use it versus, using a mouse. Like for me, like,
I totally agree.
like it's something you almost can't even overstate, you know? So
Yeah.
like
Absolutely.
actually just getting to learn. And we talked about emulations like the Pultec emulations, and I never even, until I built one point to point, I didn't even get it. I didn't even I wasn't even a fan of like those until I actually heard what one really should sound like. And that was,
So you get on to the
until I
really-
built one with
yeah.
the original iron and, the old peerless output transformer and, and that's a whole different ballgame because you start boosting highs on a real analog unit and you're going to hear that difference immediately. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I mean, so that's great. I really want to thank you all for showing up and taking the time to go through this with us. I know we covered a lot of ground. We're a little bit all over the map today, but again, for you students out there that want to get your hands on some high quality, affordable analog gear, check out audioscape.com. Again, they're right down the road there in Daytona, Florida. And again, just a big welcome to you all, and hopefully we'll have you back here again. It'd be great
You
to
stop on by the shop too.
I
Come
will
on.
come. Oh, you
See
don't.
all-
You don't want to invite me. Now you did it.
I'll greet you in a hot dog outfit.
Definitely. Well, maybe we'll take a field trip.
Yeah.
Bring the yellow school bus. We'll get all the students.
We'll make it
Oh, there
cool
you go.
and weird all at
Yeah,
once.
cool and weird. That's what we're about.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for attending our August town hall meeting with AudioScape. I hope you enjoyed it, and everybody have a great weekend.
What?
I also wanted to give a shout out to, sorry about that, shout out to the ABT crew who put this all together. Our 4 cam ops and audio, video, and lighting. Everyone did a great job. We had a great, healthy stream.
Thank you, everybody.
Woohoo!
Awesome.
Give a round of applause
Yeah.
to you guys.
Thank you, guys.